The musicians were already in position. The palace doors had opened, the ceremonial register waited for the king's signature, and hundreds of guests believed they were moments away from witnessing royal history. Then Charles looked beyond the front row and saw one face that was never supposed to be there. His expression hardened, his hand rose, and with 4 devastating words, the entire ceremony was cancelled. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles entered Buckingham Palace's grand ballroom expecting control and a display of unity. The ceremony would launch a charitable foundation under his authority, bringing several royal causes into one structure, with a clear line of responsibility. A ceremonial register was the official record placed before the monarch for signature, and every name had been checked before the doors opened. Senior royals, military representatives, trustees, and invited families had passed through that process. No one entered by accident. Camilla felt the change before she understood it. She followed her husband's stare and saw Julian Mercer, her private secretary, standing beside a restricted side entrance with a sealed burgundy folder beneath one arm. The inner ceremonial chamber was a controlled room used for documents and private instructions, meaning access required approval from the king's household. Mercer had none. His presence could not be dismissed as confusion, poor seating, or a late invitation. Charles stopped halfway toward the signing table. Anger tightened his face, but he refused to give the room the explosion it expected. Camilla whispered his name twice, searching for a sign that he believed she had nothing to do with this. He gave her no answer. Instead, the monarch turned toward the Lord Chamberlain, the senior palace official responsible for major royal ceremonies, and delivered the order with brutal calm. Cancel the ceremony. Clear the room. William saw Mercer move as the guests began to leave. The private secretary pulled the folder closer, turned toward the servants' corridor, and vanished before security could reach him. The prince crossed the floor and found a torn corner of paper near the doorway, stamped with the foundation's private seal. That fragment changed everything. Mercer had not come to watch. He had brought something designed to alter the king's decision. Charles returned to the table, removed the ceremonial pen, placed it inside its case, and closed the lid with a sharp click. The sound ended every whisper. But the man who fled was no stranger, and the 3 royals watching the empty doorway understood that the cancellation had exposed only the first layer of a far more personal betrayal. Behind the palace's closed doors, the cancellation was not being treated as a scheduling problem. It had exposed a fracture running directly through the marriage at the center of the monarchy. Charles believed his authority had been challenged. Camilla feared someone close to her had acted without permission, and William, watching both of them retreat into silence, suspected the intrusion had been designed to force a confrontation neither could escape. Charles entered his private study and removed his glasses with a trembling hand. Julian Mercer had served as Camilla's private secretary for years, managing her correspondence, charitable schedules, and sensitive communications. A private secretary is a senior aide, trusted to handle personal and official matters on behalf of a royal figure. That trust made his presence inside the restricted chamber far more dangerous than an ordinary security mistake. Camilla sat alone in the adjoining drawing room after dismissing her staff. Humiliation pressed harder than anger. Mercer had worked close enough to know her private concerns, her frustrations, and the causes she feared would be forgotten. She understood how easily his actions could be interpreted as her instructions. What frightened her most was not the investigation. It was the silence from her husband. William remained outside the study, repeating the careful words he had planned to use. The foundation mattered to him because it would place several royal projects under transparent financial oversight, meaning every major decision and payment could be independently examined. He had spent months convincing his father that no private office should dominate its funds. Mercer's folder now threatened to destroy that promise before the foundation even began. Charles opened the door before the prince could knock. William abandoned the prepared speech and placed the torn paper seal directly into his father's palm. He then described the moment he had almost overlooked. Mercer speaking urgently with a palace trustee shortly before the ceremony. The man had appeared shaken, looked repeatedly toward the exits, and left the ballroom without explanation. The king closed his fingers around the paper but said nothing. William received the second shock minutes later. A security officer confirmed through a documented access report that Mercer's name had never appeared on the approved guest list. Yet his pass had been validated through authorization issued from the Queen's office. The prince understood the implication immediately. Someone had either acted for Camilla or had wanted the palace to believe she was responsible. Camilla demanded to inspect the entry record herself. She entered the study, took the page from William, and froze when she saw the approving initials beside Mercer's name. She recognized them as her own official mark. Then she looked directly at Charles and spoke with quiet certainty. "I did not write these." The room changed in that instant. Suspicion became manipulation, and anger became something colder. Those forged initials led back to an earlier palace encounter, where a disagreement over charity had quietly become a battle for royal control. The palace crisis had not begun in the ballroom. Its true beginning came 12 days earlier, during a meeting so quiet that only 4 people knew it had taken place. No voices were raised. No accusations were recorded. Yet one sentence spoken across a polished table changed everything, because it revealed that someone intended to place the new royal foundation beyond the king's direct reach. Charles had entered that earlier meeting, determined to protect the structure William had helped design. The governing charter was the legal framework, setting out who could appoint officials, approve spending, and control public partnerships. Under its terms, the king held final authority, while independent trustees examined every major financial decision. The arrangement mattered because it prevented separate royal households from quietly directing money toward their own priorities. Camilla had asked for representation before the documents were completed. Several charities linked to her office would be absorbed into the larger foundation, and she believed those causes deserved a voice on its board. Charles rejected the request in private, insisting that the new body had to remain free from household rivalry. She heard something harsher. To her, the decision suggested that her judgment was less trusted, and her years of work could be reduced to a line in someone else's program. Julian Mercer found the Queen standing alone after the discussion, holding her disappointment behind careful silence. He reminded her that those charities had survived because she had defended them when others showed little interest. Then the private secretary made a promise that comforted her in that moment and haunted her later. "Your work will not be erased." Camilla believed he meant he would continue arguing through proper channels. She did not realize he had already chosen another path. Mercer crossed the line during a closed planning meeting later that afternoon. He placed an altered charter before palace trustee Henry Alden and instructed him to substitute it for the version Charles would sign. A trustee is an independent guardian, expected to protect an organization's money and rules from private interference. Alden immediately understood what the revised wording would do. It created a joint supervisory office with power to delay appointments, spending, and partnerships. Henry pushed the document back across the table. The wording never named Camilla, but control would pass through her private secretariat, placing Mercer at the center of every disputed decision. Alden warned him that the king would be informed before the ceremony. The aide did not retrieve the folder. He rested 2 fingers on its cover and spoke without raising his voice. "Consider what refusal may cost." Alden received an anonymous message hours later, containing private details about his family and their movements. He preserved it in a documented account, but remained silent, terrified that speaking would place them at risk. Now Charles understood that Mercer's appearance had never been accidental. When security finally brought the secretary back through the palace doors, The king prepared to confront him without ceremony, protection, or mercy. Mercer expected questions about his security pass. Instead, guards brought him into a private audience room where Charles, Camilla, and William were already waiting. No advisor stood beside him. No prepared statement rested in his hands. The king remained on his feet. The queen refused to meet her aide's eyes, and the prince watched as the door closed behind the man who had moved too close to royal power. Charles placed the official charter beside the torn paper seal and ordered Mercer to explain himself. A private audience room is a secluded palace chamber used for sensitive conversations away from public ceremony and staff traffic. This meeting was not a formal disciplinary hearing, which meant the secretary could not hide behind legal wording or demand delays. He had been found near the palace mews, the working area where royal vehicles and horses are kept, and returned before he could leave the grounds. William stood apart and listened. He watched Mercer's hands, then Camilla's face, searching for the smallest sign that either had expected this moment. The future king understood why the altered charter mattered. It could have transferred quiet influence over appointments and spending into one household, destroying the transparent structure he had spent months defending. Charles asked why the secretary had entered a restricted chamber carrying a document he had no authority to present. Mercer answered without apology. He claimed he had been protecting Camilla's charitable legacy from being swallowed by a larger institution, and forgotten once the ceremony ended. The king's restraint hardened. He reminded the aide that loyalty did not grant permission to deceive the crown. Camilla finally turned toward Mercer. Her voice shook as she asked whether he had forged the initials used to approve his entry. He admitted creating the authorization, but insisted he had acted according to what he believed she wanted. The answer wounded her more deeply than a denial. Her private frustration had been taken, reshaped, and used as permission for betrayal. Mercer then admitted carrying the altered charter, but denied threatening Henry Alden. He revealed through a recorded statement taken by palace security that another official had supplied the trustees' private family information and encouraged the pressure campaign. Charles demanded the name. For the first time, the secretary hesitated. Camilla removed Mercer's staff insignia from the table and slid it toward him. When he reached for the badge, she covered it with her palm. "You no longer speak in my name." He withdrew his hand, looked toward William, and delivered the accusation designed to fracture the room. The person helping him, he said, worked inside the prince's own administrative team. William stepped forward, anger breaking through his control, but Charles raised one hand and stopped him. Mercer had lost the queen's protection, yet his final claim moved suspicion toward the future king's inner circle, and toward an official powerful enough to cross both households without being questioned. Royal power rarely moved through dramatic commands alone. It traveled through signatures, access cards, revised schedules, and documents placed on the correct desk at the correct moment. Charles now understood that Mercer could not have entered the chamber by himself. Someone had opened a path for him, and the investigation was leading toward an official trusted by both the king and his heir. Charles ordered the digital access records brought to him before another word was spoken. The Joint Operations Office was the palace team that coordinated security permissions between his household, Camilla's staff, and William's advisors. Only a handful of senior officials could override a restricted guest list, and every override left a trace. The record showed that Mercer's pass had been approved by Deputy Comptroller Stephen Ashford. The name struck harder than expected. Ashford had served the monarchy for more than 20 years, supporting Charles through family crises and the difficult transition after the late Queen's reign. A deputy comptroller was a senior administrator responsible for palace operations, schedules, and access between royal offices. He was known for caution, discipline, and political neutrality. That reputation had made him almost invisible. Now it made his involvement terrifying. William felt the weight immediately. He had personally recommended Ashford to oversee the foundation's logistics, because he believed the administrator could work across rival households without favor. The prince told his father the choice had been based on trust, not ambition or hidden influence. Charles heard him but gave no answer. That silence forced the future king to wonder whether his judgment had just become part of the betrayal. Ashford entered the room and denied knowing anything about the altered charter. His composure held until a security officer placed a documented image before him, showing his private meeting with Mercer. The administrator's face changed. He stopped defending himself and asked to speak directly with the king. Stephen admitted authorizing the pass through a recorded palace interview. Mercer had told him Camilla possessed verbal approval from Charles for limited representation inside the new foundation. Ashford believed he was preventing a public clash between husband and wife, not helping to corrupt the ceremony. He had opened the restricted door because he trusted an aide who understood exactly how to use that trust. Ashford removed his identification card and placed it beside Charles's hand. The monarch did not accept it. For several painful seconds, neither man spoke, and the official understood that decades of service had ended in silence. Before leaving, Ashford handed Charles a copied email. It proved Mercer had been communicating with an outside public relations advisor who expected the ceremony to create what he called a necessary constitutional confrontation. The scheme was no longer trapped inside palace corridors. Someone beyond the royal household had prepared to turn the signing into a public weapon, and the first consequences were already beginning. By evening, the grand ballroom had been emptied, the flowers removed, and every official program locked away. Yet the cancellation continued to move through the palace like a shockwave. Staff members were suspended, trustees demanded answers, charitable partners threatened to withdraw, and inside her private rooms, Camilla faced the brutal truth that an aide who claimed to protect her legacy had instead placed her marriage and public standing in danger. Charles approved a palace statement saying the ceremony had been postponed because of an internal procedural breach. A procedural breach meant that official rules governing access, documents, or approval had been broken. The announcement did not name Mercer, but his staff profile disappeared from the royal website within hours. That silence said enough. Reporters began connecting his sudden removal to the cancelled signing, while palace offices stopped answering questions. The king then ordered an immediate audit of every email, access authorization, and foundation draft exchanged between the royal households during the previous month. An audit was a formal examination designed to trace who had handled each decision and document. The order mattered because it removed the possibility of quiet protection. No friendship, rank, or private loyalty would be allowed to hide what had happened. Camilla received Mercer's resignation letter before dinner. He wrote of loyalty, service, and his determination to defend her charities, yet offered no apology for forging her authority. She read the final paragraph twice, searching for regret that never appeared. Then the Queen tore the page directly across his signature. Charles entered expecting resistance. Instead, he found his wife sitting beside an untouched tray, exhausted and alone. She told him she had never approved the altered charter, but admitted she had complained bitterly that her work was being pushed aside. The confession was painful because it gave Mercer the emotional material he had used to justify his actions. William arrived with a second discovery taken from documented correspondence seized during the audit. The outside public relations advisor had prepared two statements before the ceremony. One celebrated Camilla's supposed victory if Charles signed the altered document. The other accused the king of publicly humiliating her if he refused. The prince understood the design immediately. His father had been trapped either way. Charles read both statements and finally saw the full cruelty of the plan. The ceremony had not merely been influenced. It had been built to damage him, divide his marriage, and force the family into opposing public positions. Camilla held the torn resignation letter above the fireplace but could not release it. Charles gently took the pieces from her fingers and placed them on the table. Then he told William the foundation could survive only if the family presented one united decision. That unity, however, would require a conversation deeper than forged initials, altered charters, or public scandal. It would require husband and wife to speak after everyone else had been ordered away. For the first time since the ceremony collapsed, Charles and Camilla sat together without advisors, files, or members of staff between them. The palace outside their room remained consumed by investigations, but the monarchy's immediate future depended on a conversation no official could manage for them. He needed the truth about her resentment. She needed to know whether his suspicion had already destroyed the trust beneath their public partnership. Charles asked William to leave the palace for the evening and suspended all further questioning until morning. The prince understood that the foundation could not be rescued while anger still controlled every decision. A revised charter was a rewritten governing document setting out who held authority and how money, appointments, and partnerships would be managed. Before such a document could exist, husband and wife had to decide whether they still trusted one another. Camilla spoke first. She admitted that she had feared her charities would disappear once they were absorbed into a larger royal structure. Those causes had shaped years of her public work, and losing their identity felt like losing proof that her efforts had mattered. She had wanted recognition and honest representation. She had never wanted hidden control. Charles listened without interrupting. Then he admitted that excluding her office without a full conversation had made her feel dismissed. He also confessed something harder. When he saw Mercer standing inside the restricted chamber, he believed for several painful minutes that she had arranged the ambush herself. The king's honesty landed with more force than anger ever could. Camilla did not defend herself. Sadness replaced the humiliation she had carried all day. She said Mercer's worst act was not damaging her public reputation or forcing the ceremony to collapse. It was creating a moment when her husband could reasonably doubt her. That wound, she told him, would last longer than any headline. The Queen then gave Charles access to her complete private correspondence. Through a documented email chain, she identified an earlier message in which Mercer encouraged her to describe the foundation as an attempt to erase her influence. The wording had seemed supportive at the time. Now it appeared calculated. Charles read the exchange twice. Together they understood that Mercer had spent weeks deepening a manageable disagreement, turning ordinary frustration into emotional permission for an unauthorized intervention. He had not merely exploited division, he had carefully created it. Camilla removed her wedding ring and turned it slowly between her fingers. She admitted that she feared the crisis had changed how Charles saw her. He closed her hand around the ring and told her the deception would not define their marriage. The king then made his decision. The ceremony would proceed under a revised charter, but only after they jointly agreed on a legitimate role for her charities. Their reconciliation gave the palace a path forward. Beyond its walls, however, the cancellation had already become a national spectacle, demanding a public and unmistakable answer. The following morning, the palace gates became the center of a national argument. Commentators debated royal authority. Newspapers questioned Camilla's influence, and television crews repeated the same few seconds of footage. Charles stopping before the signing table, staring toward the restricted doorway, and closing the ceremonial pen. That single image transformed an internal breach into a public test of whether the monarchy could still control its own household. Palace correspondents received a formal statement confirming that a senior staff member had entered the ceremony without authorization and attempted to present an altered governance document. A governance document is the written set of rules explaining who controls appointments, spending, and major decisions inside an organization. The statement confirmed the breach, but protected the private conversation between Charles and Camilla. It gave the public facts without turning their marriage into evidence. The foundation's trustees responded through a documented public release, supporting the king's decision to cancel rather than sign a compromised charter. Their words mattered, because the trustees were independent guardians of the foundation's rules and money. Their support changed the argument. Charles had not abandoned the ceremony out of temper. He had stopped a document whose integrity could no longer be trusted. William watched the coverage from Kensington Palace and felt the story moving in a dangerous direction. Several headlines placed Camilla beside Mercer as though frustration and deception were the same thing. The prince called his father and argued that the palace response had to separate her private concerns from the secretary's secret actions. Charles agreed, but warned that one careless sentence could expose the reconciliation they had fought to protect. Camilla refused to look away. She found her photograph beneath the words, "Palace Power Struggle," and read every line, despite the king urging her to stop. The queen believed hiding would make the accusations feel stronger. She had been manipulated, but she also knew her resentment had helped create the opening Mercer exploited. Rain fell as a crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace. A newspaper vendor raised a front page, showing Charles with one hand lifted beneath the headline, "The King said stop." Nearby, an elderly woman placed a small bouquet beside the railings with a card reading, "Trust must come before tradition." Cameras captured the message, and by evening, it had become the image repeated across every major broadcast. A constitutional historian then explained, during a recorded live interview, that the cancellation was not evidence of royal collapse. It was a rare example of a monarch refusing to approve a process after its independence had been compromised. The palace answered with one final announcement. Charles, Camilla, and William would appear together when the ceremony resumed. Public judgment had begun shifting from scandal toward accountability. Now the king had to return to the table he abandoned and prove exactly what the monarchy had learned. 7 days after the palace fell silent, the ceremony began again. The same register rested on the same table, but almost everything else had changed. The compromised charter was gone. The unauthorized officials were absent. And when Charles entered with Camilla on one side and William on the other, the message was unmistakable. The monarchy would not deny the betrayal, but neither would it allow that betrayal to divide the family permanently. Charles approached the signing table with the revised foundation charter waiting before him. The charter was the official document defining who could control appointments, spending, partnerships, and internal decisions. Under its new terms, the king retained final authority, while a transparent advisory council gave every participating charity a proper voice. Camilla's causes would be represented openly, not through hidden influence or private pressure. Independent trustees now held responsibility for financial oversight. Their role was to examine funding, appointments, and internal reviews without answering to any single royal household. That protection mattered, because the crisis had shown how quickly personal loyalty could be turned into institutional power. No secretary, advisor, or private office would ever again be able to move a document through the palace without clear accountability. Charles paused beside Camilla before taking his seat. Their words could not be heard, but the Queen's expression changed as he spoke. She nodded slowly, understanding that her work had not been erased. It had been recognized through an honest structure, rather than seized through deception. The pain remained, but the humiliation no longer controlled the moment. William stepped forward with the final document and accepted responsibility for strengthening palace access procedures. The prince admitted through a recorded internal statement that trust alone could no longer replace verification. His father answered without anger. Charles placed one hand on his son's arm, ending the tension that had grown between them, and confirming that accountability had strengthened their bond rather than broken it. Mercer had been permanently removed from royal service. Ashford's resignation had been accepted, while the outside public relations advisor was barred from all future palace work. Every route used to construct the trap had been closed. The consequences were final. Charles signed the legitimate charter and invited Camilla to stand beside him, as the signature was witnessed. That gesture delivered the true verdict. Her charitable contribution remained valued, but no private loyalty would ever stand above transparent royal duty. The king then closed the pen case exactly as he had during the cancellation. This time, applause followed the sharp click. Camilla exhaled. William lowered his head in relief, and Charles allowed himself a restrained smile. The first ceremony ended because trust had been violated. The second succeeded because trust had been rebuilt in the open. The monarchy survived not by hiding its fracture, but by confronting it. And that became the complete meaning of the king's decision. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.